I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Guelph, and I did my MSc in health psychology at Trent University. And so when I was at Trent, I did a specialization in sexting specifically. So I looked at the risks and benefits of sexting, particularly within intimate relationships. And so I've done a lot of research around sexting. I've also looked at, sexting in older adults and how they're using it and how that relates to their body image and their satisfaction in their sexual lives, which is super interesting. And then recently I've been doing some work more generally in sexual health, talking about, kind of how we've gotten to where we currently are in sexual health and how pleasure should be included in our general understanding of what sexual health is. So yeah.
You bring up some really interesting points about, sexting or this type of flirty communication having a positive effect on someone's self-esteem, basically. And that kind of leads me to one of the questions I wanted to ask you, because with a platform like Jasmin, I feel like some of the members that are there have a lot of potentially social anxiety, or for some reason they're a little bit more isolated. And I'm wondering your thoughts on, let's say they have a really positive experience on the platform. Is that something that could then translate into their life moving forward? Are they going to have more confidence? Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think that it's really valuable to have platforms like this for that exact reason, right? So it can really build self-esteem. These are platforms where people aren't concerned about rejection, right? So they can build up that like feeling good about themselves and get that kind of self-esteem built up and almost kind of as like a practice, right? So they can kind of practice the skills that are kind of needed for their in-person sexual encounters and then can bring those skills that they've learned using this site into their kind of everyday interpersonal lives.
Topics around human connection seem to make people uncomfortable. What is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something we've built over a lot of time, right? And we see certainly a religious aspect play a role there, and an area, right? In the US and Canada, we tend to be more that way than like a lot of the European countries, right? Even if you watch kind of our basic TV, you'll see a lot more nudity in anything produced out of Europe than things that are produced here in North America. And so that's really something that we've kind of created this huge taboo around sexuality and intimacy. And so for us, we have kind of pushed it into the side. And then so that makes it interesting, right? We really want to engage with that and understand that because people tell us we shouldn't. People that are calling us obsessed are the ones that don't want us to talk about it, right? And I think also, I mean, there's a big part of the patriarchy that plays a role there too, right? And that like if women fully understood like their sexuality and the power that they had, like other people who currently have power would not have as much, and we would, kind of change things and make them better and different, and that would kind of disturb the status quo.
Some girls play the piano, and some girls may post more flirty or sexual content, and they're also making great monetary rewards from that. And so when you have a platform like this, where women specifically are making really good money, enough to take control of their lives, and then they also are given the freedom sexually, do you think that a platform like this would be threatening? Is that why there's so much attack on something like these types of platforms? Is that what it is? Is it a threat? What are your thoughts?
I definitely think that's an aspect of it, right? As you say, like women are really able to take control here and do what they're comfortable with. And there is a lack of censorship, which is amazing because we see so much censorship on other platforms, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, I mean, all of them. are really censored. And even platforms that have come out, that have been less censored have then over time become censored, right? So it's really great to have a platform that isn't doing that, that actually, is kind of fighting against, no, we're going to say and do what we want. And we're not going to be told by anyone or anyone in power that we're not able to or we're not allowed to. So yeah, I definitely think that's a huge piece of it is, they're scared of what are we going to do with that power.
Yeah, I mean, women specifically, I feel like obviously it's not just women, um, but women make up the larger numbers of this industry as far as webcamming goes, and probably in general, I feel like content creation. This is kind of where now all of a sudden everyone has an opportunity to almost be an entrepreneur. So it's giving women specifically though a lot of power.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also, there's a lot of control with it for the women. They can do multiple things, right? Like you could be a stay-at-home mom and do this, right? Like you get the control over time, you get the control over exactly what it is that you want to be doing. Yeah, so I think that's really powerful for women to be taking that and to be making their finances, in the way that they have power that way.
I have a quick question for you because when I was listening to that podcast, I was seriously thinking like, thank God for people like you and Justin, who are willing to study this for us, right? Because it is so in the shadows. Do you find, obviously it's clear that webcammers, they're stigmatized, right? Do you find that even you as an expert, do you get stigmatized because of what you study?
There are certainly times, I mean, I do tend to run in circles with other people that study it, right? Like you're kind of running in those circles, particularly when I go to conferences and stuff, I go places where other people are doing the same thing. But yeah, certainly when I'm in places where other people aren't studying sex, that there is certainly some stigmatization. And, sometimes you have to be like careful about exactly what you say, because people will push back, and there's a lot of like sex negativity out there, and so it can be really difficult at times, but there certainly is a lot of stigma even just studying it, but I would say there's more stigma in doing camming.
Right. Why is that?
It's funny because we see like work like sex work, and camming included in that being like a selling of our bodies in some sort of way. And yet things like construction aren't seen in the same way, even though like you're using your body to get some sort of result. I think it's just, women have a lot of power when it comes to sex. And so again, that fear comes in, right? Of like, well, if women realize that they have all these power and use it, like what's going to happen?
Yeah, the more that I myself kind of study these topics around intimacy and human connection, I do find that it's starting to look like this really is the area where women were naturally really empowered, right? Like, and is that something that people are still trying to keep hidden or something like that? Because I remember hearing a story. I can't remember the exact cultures or tribes, but long story short, the women of a culture were trying to stop a war. And
Mm,
so they all came together and they said, listen, let's refuse to have sex with our husbands until this war ends. And the war ended shortly after that. And this is a real story, but it does show that power that, yeah, if women, like you were saying, really become aware of it, which we're starting to,
mhm.
it seems like maybe somewhere culturally there's a fear of what's going to change. What power are we
Yeah.
going to lose over them?
Yeah. And I think too, like if women realize it in this one area, then they're going to realize it in all of these other areas that they have this power. And I remember, similar to your story, there was a story, and I want to say it was out of France, but I'm not positive, where women decided they wanted more working rights. And so they all decided, okay, none of us are going to work, like no unpaid work with childcare or house cleaning or anything, like, and I think it lasted maybe not even a week, right? Like, of realizing how much work women do, and particularly unpaid work that women do, and that the society doesn't run without us, right? So we have all of this power. And I think one of the great things about a site like this too is, there isn't kind of a man who is controlling what the performers are doing, and then taking a big cut, right? Which is what we see a lot of the time in other sex work. Here, the performers get a lot more choice, and can kind of control more, which is really nice with camming. And we've seen that with things like OnlyFans too, right? Like these different ways in which there's control, and there isn't someone kind of raking in a ton off of kind of, the performers' backs.
Even Instagram is a similar situation where we are choosing to express ourselves, and we do see that, I guess, the more flirty you are, the more likes and clicks you're going to get. That's human nature.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to know your thoughts on a site like Jasmin. How do you see it in comparison to, I'd say, first, other social media sites, and comparison to porn?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things in compared to porn is that this is live, right? So there's an interaction component there, which I think is particularly important. Whereas with porn, right, that's like a pre-recorded video that people can watch. But with this, they get to interact, which I think is a really big piece of it, and a piece where people get more connection than they would, right, with just kind of porn where you're watching a video that you're not really a part of. Whereas with Jasmin, you're a part of what's happening, right? And you get to be kind of involved in the things going on. And so that ability to connect in that way, and even potentially for some of the clients, certainly making a relationship with one person, right? Like they might choose, oh, I really like this girl and I'm going to keep going back to them. Versus like that can be harder to do with like, oh, I like this one porn star and I'm only going to watch their stuff, right? Like it's just not quite the same as having someone live who you can go back to, and like, what hours they work, when they're going to be there, you can create a relationship. And I was on your site a little bit, and I saw some of the ones where people will be like, oh, hey, like you're here, like clearly they've talked before and they know each other. So like that connection and that intimacy and that opportunity is something that you can't really get in everyday porn.
Yeah, I think, that word connection, that is the big word, because obviously during the COVID pandemic, there was a huge spike on platforms like Jasmin. And well, let me know your thoughts, because my thought is, if it was really just about sexual content, there would have been just a huge spike in porn websites, right? So what is it about Jasmin that people felt the need to come there when they were so lonely?
Yeah, I definitely think that intimate connection and pleasure that they can get kind of in that live format, but also the ability to practice, right? And be able to figure out, like, how do I talk about sex? How do I become more comfortable talking about sex through, these interactions? And how do I kind of get better at having these conversations, which they can then use in-person interactions or even online interactions, but with someone that they are wanting to pursue a relationship with. And those opportunities don't exist just in regular porn, right? You're not talking with the people engaging. I think the other thing that we've seen a lot throughout the pandemic is kind of a general shift in our ideas and understanding in a lot of different areas, But one area where we've seen people shifting is exploring their sexuality and their gender identity more. And so a lot of people have been kind of changing the labels that they're using. And I could definitely see something like Jasmin being helpful in that process, right? Like you do have performers of all genders and you have various different couplings on the website as well. It's not always just like a single person. And so people could use that to kind of figure out where they land and what their interests are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because when I was listening to the podcast you did with Justin, I was having so many thoughts, but you guys did touch on, sex tech and that type of thing. And while, sex tech and Jasmin are different, in my opinion, what seemed to be clear is that it begs this question: where would we be without those things when something like the pandemic hit, right? Where would people have been if they didn't have some of these outlets to turn to when their partner was across the world and couldn't leave their home country, or maybe they didn't have a partner? What role did these platforms play there?
Yeah, I think these platforms played a huge role there, right? Like they allowed for connection that wasn't possible, and many people chose during the single people chose during this period not to date or really to limit their dating for various different reasons, but obviously physical distancing being one of them. And then, so you're right. How do you have an outlet, even like sexually, but also even just like to make connection, those kind of generic date topics and things that you talk about, right? Like just someone to connect with. And this platform, I think, really facilitates that well, because you can go back and talk to the same people and make that connection.
It's interesting because you guys talked about like the Netflix dates and the Zoom dates, and I was thinking about the people during the pandemic that maybe, they didn't have a partner that they could Zoom and watch the same Netflix show. And that is probably the type of person that's like, okay, let me find an outlet where I can connect to someone. How do we break this stigma? Because, for example, if I don't know how to cook, I still need to eat. So I would go and buy food from someone who's made it, like a restaurant, or maybe hire a chef. So for people who don't have partners, they still need to connect. Why is it a problem that they would connect through whatever it is, social media, Jasmin, whatever's out there?
Yeah. And it's interesting. And I think there's a lot of benefits to this. I think people kind of get in the way of the idea of payment for whatever reason. That's where people get a little stuck on, in comparison to like, well, if you met this person in like just online, like a dating website, and then did similar things as you would here, but you're not paying for it versus paying for it. And that's where a lot of people kind of get stuck. But I think the benefits are huge. And especially if we think about too, in addition to, single people throughout the pandemic, but people with disabilities, right? Who may not have access to getting partners in the same way that those who are able-bodied do. And so that could be really beneficial for them to be able to talk to someone in a paid environment.
How, in your opinion, do we start to break this wall of the stigma?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a hard wall to break, but I think talking about it's a huge part, right? And we've seen that with other movements like the mental health, where we used to see a really big stigma there, and we've started to see that break down as people talk about it, particularly kind of high profile people like celebrities and big organizations like Bell Let's Talk, right? They've brought a lot of attention to it. So I think that's a big way for us to go, is to keep talking about it and to get it out there, and to be having these discussions is really important. There's a big concern over like, if we talk about it, it'll happen more. Which isn't really the case. Like that's a big argument for like why we shouldn't teach sex ed, right? Like, well, if we tell them about sex, then they're going to go do it. Well, no, that's not how that functions. So I think there's like a concern over that, right? Like, well, if we talk about like sex and sexuality and different platforms that people can use as an outlet, people will use those things. And, you know, to an extent, it's like, well, yeah, that's the point. But when they're fearful, when you mix that fear in there with that unknown, then that kind of creates this like cocktail of not of pushback, essentially.
What is our deepest psychological craving as humans?
I would say, you know, connections quite up there, right? Like we want to be able to connect with other people. And that looks a lot of different ways, right? So just that idea of belonging, of feeling like we fit here in this world in whatever way that we feel like we fit. And so, you know, that connection and that want for belonging is really strong. And the pandemic obviously has made that difficult. And things can be a lot more difficult online, even, you know, how do you find people to connect with versus like a lot of people find people at work, or you find people in these places that you typically go, you know, the hobbies that you do or whatever. And so finding that online can be more difficult, as we've all been forced online, if you didn't have kind of already set groups of people. And so, you know, that has been a big challenge with the pandemic. And I think that's one of the reasons that you've seen such high traffic to the site with Jasmin, because that fills that void.
Right. What's the future from how you see it with human connection and this digital world that seems to only be growing?
I think we're going to continue with it. I think we're going to keep going. I think we're going to try out new things. There's a lot of talk around like sex robots and like moving forward, right? Like what kind of inventions there will be. I think will be things that I can't even imagine now, but like 15 years from now will be the norm. So I think we will see a shift with that too. And I'm hoping, we're always hopeful that we'll see a shift to more sex positivity and more willingness to engage in kind of conversations around sex and talking about it and taking it out of that taboo. But I do see us, you know, continuing to shift and people, you know, working and finding people online more and connecting online more and more. What would kind of go a long way is reducing the censorship that currently exists, particularly on kind of more social media platforms like Instagram, like Facebook, where, you know, sex educators are constantly being flagged and having their accounts taken down because of the educating that they're doing around sexuality. And so those would be kind of those middle ground steps.
Yeah, that, I mean, even you saying that, that makes me think right there, you know, our big tech is flagging it and taking it down. It just seems like there is this overarching fear
Yeah.
for this to go too far, or for us to be too educated about our sexuality, which is just such an innate part of who we are. From a streamer's perspective, what benefits are they receiving potentially psychologically from these interactions?
They may get the similar connection that the clients do, right? Like they're going to get that intimacy and that connection back as well, and may also get those like practice pieces too, like, oh, when I said this, like they reacted really well to that versus when I said this, right? So they may kind of find those pieces as well that are really, really helpful for them.
It really is just like social media. You know, you put out a cute flirty picture. We all know we've put out those cute pictures, you know, and you get a ton of likes and a ton of comments from men saying, oh, you're so hot, or whatever the case is. And it's boom, there's that confidence boost, you know,
Yeah.
even though you put that out for them, you know, you also have just gotten that boost. And like you said, it becomes feedback too. Okay, what works? What doesn't work?
Yeah, for sure. There's certainly kind of that self-esteem piece in there, right? Like we can build the self-esteem when we get positive reactions and they feel good, and builds our esteem for moving further on, for anything else that we do.
So this platform is something that is probably building confidence and self-esteem for the member and the model.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
that makes sense. Um, what's just one of the most interesting pieces of research that you found around this topic of digital connection and human sexuality?
I just think how much people get out of it, right? Like they get so much out of it. There's a lot of pleasure involved. There's a lot of, knowledge involved. There's a lot of kind of discovering themselves, which a lot of people find to be like a really fun process of, figuring out, okay, what do I like? What do I not like? Who do I like? All of those kinds of things. And so I think people really enjoy the process and aren't worried about kind of the ending, right? Like what's the outcome? It's an enjoyment of the process, which so many times we're just striving for a goal and we don't kind of have fun along the way. Whereas with digital communication, the fun is along the way, right? Like there isn't really an end goal so much.
Absolutely. Why do we need this digital communication right here, right now, in this time?
Well, I mean, with the pandemic still looming, there's still a lot of people making decisions of not wanting to engage with others in person, and so that's a really important part of it. And also, I think the opportunity to have kind of interactions beyond kind of your circle opens us up to more experiences, more understanding of the world, being able to understand and connect with each other more broadly as well. And we can understand each other when you're not kind of in this circle where everyone's saying the same thing, when you can get to this connection of, there's other voices and other things being said that you can kind of think about and, oh, okay, like I see how that would be relevant for them, and how that might be relevant in my life. And so those pieces I think are really important, for us to be able to go beyond our backyard.
Let's say we have, you know, um, a 30-year-old male who is somewhere in the world where they're under a heavy lockdown and he hasn't had human connection, like physical touch, or been in person with anyone in 2 or 3 months. What would you suggest for someone like that?
To kind of get a connection somehow, right? So something like Jasmin, or kind of other sites that may do kind of similar things, or even just kind of like putting yourself out there on Instagram and seeing what happens, right? Kind of joining groups of hobby things that are related, right? Kind of working those ways of trying to find like how to kind of bring that touch into your life.
I know here in California, we've heard of like suicide going up during the pandemic, and I just think that if more people had some type of connection to get them through, as opposed to this abrupt nothing,
Mhm.
we could potentially mitigate some of that. And that is an area where, well, maybe you could give me your thoughts that maybe Jasmin could help, just to, because also, what do you think that about Jasmin being like a safe place? Let's say this guy puts himself on Instagram. Well, any troll can just come on there and be like, no, no one likes you, those
Mhm.
Instagram trolls. But on Jasmin, that it's a place where you're probably going to get some type of connection or love or validation.
Yeah, I think Jasmine could be really beneficial for that. With that, like you're not going to get rejection there, right? And so that's a huge piece, because you're absolutely right. Like on Instagram or kind of general social media, you are going to have people that make rude comments and have those aspects to it. Whereas on something like Jasmine, that's not going to be the case. You are going to be able to make that connection. And it could be either way. It could be in the way of like you find one person that you go back to, or maybe you make a connection with a couple of different people, right? Or you want to make a new connection with someone new every day, right? Like depending on what you're looking for, all of those options are there. And I think, the connection between mental health and every other facet of health and sexuality is huge. And intimacy and connection, like those are all really interconnected. And I think it's important that we are getting those facets of intimacy and connection for our mental health. And I think Jasmin could play a great role there.
It's so fascinating that you said that piece right now, because I just had that thought earlier today, that it all starts, every type of our part of our health starts with mental health first, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the moment your mental health starts slipping, maybe you don't eat as well. Maybe you stop going to the gym because you're sad, or whatever the case is.
Yeah, for sure. As you know, like mental health, connects to all of those different aspects of health. And as that slips, other things can slip, right? And become more difficult. And so, when we're trying to keep our mental health up, connection's a huge part of that.
Do you think we can have mental health without connection, or is that a pillar?
I think it's a really big pillar. And I think, the thing with connection too is you find people that are like you and people that have similar experiences. And that can be really important when dealing with any mental health difficulties, right? Often when we have difficulties, we feel really alone. And if we find the connection and find people who are having similar difficulties, we feel less alone. And that's a really important part of it.
Thank you so much. This is just so valuable. Everything you're saying, it's so important. And again, I just want to honor your work and what you guys are doing, because we need more people generally and culturally to be talking about human intimacy, and connection, which, as you've just said, is literally a pillar of our mental health.
I'm excited for the rest of the podcast too. I think it's going to be really great and really needed.